Welcome back to Rand on Real Estate. I'm Greg Rand, your host on 77 WABC, WABCRadio.com. My website is called ownamerica.com. That's ownamerica.com because you too can own a piece of America and build wealth as a result. Our number here is 800-848-WABC. That's 800-848-9222. And we've got a really interesting interview lined up for you now with a friend of mine named Alex Perriello. Alex, how you doing?
I'm doing well, Greg. How are you?
I'm doing great. Glad to have you here.
Thanks.
Alex is the CEO of the Realogy Franchise Group, which is the company that owns Coldwell Banker, Century 21, Better Homes and Gardens, ERA, Sotheby's. They've got a dominant position in the housing business nationwide, and Alex is a really well-respected guy, and it's no surprise at all that he recently wrote a piece that appeared in the New York Times with an idea about how to solve the dreaded foreclosure crisis. So let me set it up real quick. This is the challenge, okay? We all know that there are some 5 million, 10 million. The numbers vacillate now and then, but some untold numbers of millions of people who are defaulting on their mortgages, facing losing their homes, and everybody wants to see if they can help them. And so first the government tried something called loan modifications, which basically says we're going to lower your payment. We're going to cut your interest rate. We're going to extend your loan term. We're going to find a way to lower your payment. And it was a dismal failure because they could not lower the payments enough to make a difference. Then they came up with the idea of principal reduction, which is, hey, you owe $500,000, you can't pay it, let's just make it less money, and wouldn't that be wonderful? Problem is, the next-door neighbor gets kind of ticked off because he or she is paying their loan and they're not going to get a principal reduction. This year, the big idea was just stop the banks from foreclosing. And that's what you heard all through the fall, and as recently as I think it was yesterday, there was a ruling in Massachusetts where they actually are finding legal ways to reverse and stop foreclosures, and that's not going to work either because it just log jams the whole problem. So let me cue Alex now. Alex, tell us about the concept.
Well, thanks, Greg, and you really summed it up pretty nicely. The actual number from the research that I've done, there's between 11 and 15 million homeowners right now in the United States that are underwater, meaning they owe more than the house is worth, which represents about 23% of all the houses that have a mortgage. So it's a pretty significant issue, and that's what's really driving this foreclosure mess. Let me give you an example. It's probably the best way to explain how this would work.
Great.
Let's say you used $500,000. Let's use that number. Let's say you bought a house at the height of the market for $500,000, and today the house is worth $350,000. That's a pretty dramatic drop, and it's a pretty extreme example, but let's do that because it keeps the math simple.
But a lot of people in a lot of places in this country are facing exactly that right now.
Either that or even more in some cases. So you have to look at, as a homeowner, that's really not a good place to be. You owe more than the house is worth, so what are your options? The first option is to just sort of grin and bear it and keep paying the mortgage. The reality of that, though, is that gets pretty old, and you're going to be waiting years, likely many years, before you'll actually get back to what you paid for the house. The other option that you mentioned is a loan modification. They're not easy. Usually you have to, default on the loan, not make payments for 90 days, so you get the bank's attention before they'll even talk to you, and then you need to demonstrate that there's some hardship involved and that you can't make the payments, and then they'll talk to you about possibly renegotiating the terms. And as you said, they attack the payment, not the problem. They try to find a payment that you can live with, but they don't drop the loan balance enough to get you back in an equity position.
Right.
So you're still underwater, but now you have lower payments. The other option is a short sale. Just find a realtor, put the house on the market, get an appraisal, try to market the house for that, let's say, the $350,000, and hope that the bank will accept that short sale, if you will. But the problem there is the homeowner has to move.
Right.
And in that case, they're going to also, it's going to damage their credit, and then they're going to be, faced with renting for the next 4 or 5 years. The other thing, which is probably the most troublesome, is what's being referred to now as a strategic default. Just stop making the payments. Stay in the house for as long as you can till the sheriff comes to the door and throws you out.
Yeah, we call those guys deadbeats. Where I come from.
Deadbeats, yeah. But strategic default is the new word for deadbeat. So how this debt for equity strategy would work is basically you'd go to the lender and say, look, I owe $500,000 on this house. It's worth $350,000. That's a 30% drop in value. Let's work something out. And the workout is that they would issue a new loan for $350,000. they would retire the $500,000 loan. Now, they've taken, let's just say, the extreme example, you financed 100% of the house. So you have a $500,000 loan on a $500,000 house when you started. Now it's at $350,000. The bank, the lender, has really lost 30%. That's a 30% drop in the value of the house. So you're asking them to take a 30% haircut, if you will, on their loan. Now, they're not going to be excited about that, but this concept of debt for equity, your strategy would be, give me a new loan for $350,000, and I'll give you a 30% interest, ownership interest in my house, so that at some point in the future, when I sell, you'll get back 30% of the net proceeds. So there's some upside for the lender for doing this, and it's certainly better than a short sale or a strategic default. So
right, it's beautiful really, because it's. I'm sorry to cut you off a second, but the idea that the moral hazard, a term that gets thrown around a lot, and people don't always explain what that means. The idea that if you make it too juicy, then people are going to volunteer for it. That's kind of the American way, right? If there's a government giveaway of some kind, or if the bank is going to forgive something and make it too sweet, people are going to line up for that. This is not something that people are necessarily going to line up for unless they absolutely need it, in which case you're not going to create volunteers in any large degree, I don't think.
Right, because you have to give up ownership, a percentage of the ownership of your house. And you're right, your next-door neighbor now, if they hear what you've done, they'll say, well, gee, I'd like a $350,000 loan on my $500,000 house, but you'll say, yes, but I had to give up 30% ownership in the house to the bank, and when I sell, they get 30% of the proceeds. So to me, it's a very respectable way to work out of a very, very difficult situation.
Yeah, I think so too. Alex and I have spoken about this at length over the last year, and I don't know that there was any possibility of it getting any kind of action down in Washington because there were people that had different kinds of ideas. But there's a new age upon us right now, and the hope is that with your work of getting this information into the right hands, people in Washington, anybody taking any notice of this down in Washington yet, or is that something that you hope will happen next?
No, well, that's what I'm hoping next. The New York Times article was very, very helpful. It got a lot of attention. I've been circulating that to the people that I know in Washington to see if we can get some interest. But really, the banks need to step up. The banks need to realize that this is a problem. It's not going to go away. And they need to deal with it. And for a homeowner who's in that situation, thinking, well, gee, how could I get that done for me? You have to be aggressive.
Right. Well, the good news is that you're now on Randon Real Estate. So the New York Times was helpful, but you ain't seen nothing. You know, now the whole world really heard about this, Alex. So listen, we got to jump because we have some breaking news. But I want to thank you for coming on board. I think that you're doing great work here. You have a chance here to show how the private sector is where the solutions come from. So thank you very much, Alex Perriello. All right, we're going to go now to ABC News. We have a status update on the shooting of Arizona Congresswoman Gabrielle Giffords. This is Greg Rand on 77 WABC. Back in a few moments.